Okay, next is our panel on AI deployment, which will explore some of the issues and impacts facing AI implementation in healthcare today. 5 different areas the panel will explore are the critical need to move research into the clinical space, how technology has changed, how AI systems are demonstrating a positive impact on health outcomes measures, how policy, data governance, and cybersecurity are affecting the progress of deployment, and what exciting new breakthroughs are on the immediate horizon. Today's panel includes Parvin Mousavi. Parvin is a professor of computer science, medicine, pathology, and biomedical and molecular sciences at Queen's University, a member of the Royal Society of Canada, College of New Scholars, and a Canada CIFAR AI chair, and she is also a faculty member at Vector Institute. Her research focuses on developing and leveraging machine learning in computer-assisted medical interventions and precision medicine, contributing to the societal impact of AI on the global community. Welcome, Parvin. Our next panelist is Frank Rudzicz. Frank Rudzicz is a scientist at the International Center for Surgical Safety, Likashing Knowledge Institute, St. Michael's Hospital, and also an associate professor at the University of Toronto and a faculty member at Vector Institute. His research is machine learning in healthcare, especially natural language processing, speech recognition, and surgical safety. Frank is also the co-founder and president of Winterlight Labs. Welcome, Frank. Our next panelist is Michael Brudno. He is computer scientist specializing in computational methods for the analysis of medical data, working as a professor at the University of Toronto and the chief data scientist for the University Health Network. He is also a faculty member at the Vector Institute for AI and the scientific director of HPC for Health, a private computing cloud for Ontario hospitals. His research goal is to streamline clinical workflows and enable faster and better treatments by creating seamless automated analysis of patient omics data based on automatically captured information from clinical encounters. Welcome, Michael. And next is Benjamin Fine. Dr. Fine is a radiologist and clinician scientist at Trillium Health Partners, a University of Toronto affiliated hospital system and the largest in Canada. He leads the AI deployment and evaluation lab at the hospital affiliated Population Health Research Institute for Better Health, focused on externally validating AI tools use real-world diverse data and users. He is the department lead for quality and informatics and has experience designing and deploying imaging and clinical informatics systems. Welcome, Ben. And the panel will be moderated by Rahul Krishnan. Rahul is an assistant professor of computer science and medicine at University of Toronto. He is a CIFAR AI chair and faculty member at Vector Institute and a member of the Timerty Center for Artificial Intelligence in Medicine. He works on leveraging tools from developing algorithms for probabilistic inference and applied machine learning to problems in healthcare, such as modeling disease progression and risk stratification. Previously, he was a senior researcher at Microsoft Research, New England. Please join me in welcoming our panelists. Over to you, Rahul.
All right. Thank you so much, Elham, for the very kind introductions. It's wonderful to be here. And so I'm going to be moderating the panel. But before I start, I just wanted to give folks in the audience a heads up about how this is going to go. So we'll have a bit of a discussion at the beginning. But what I would really love from all of you is to keep track of all of the interesting questions that you have. So we'll, at the end, circle back to you for the audience to ask some questions. And when I say interesting questions, I'd like you to think of questions where you suspect that the panelists might disagree, because often those are going to be the most fun discussions and questions for us to have at the end. So with that, maybe what I'll do to kick us off is have everyone, we've had the introductions, but maybe what you can say is, what has been your favorite research project or project just at this intersection of ML and healthcare? Parvin?
Sure. Thank you very much. So it's because I'm old, I would say my favorite is the most recent one that I remember. But let me start with that. I work in AI, applied AI, and computer-aided interventions. So this is similar to some of the other applications. Actually, my work involves deployment at the get-go. We were having this conversation with Rahul. One of my favorite projects, which is one of our latest projects, is enabling AI deployment in surgery, particularly cancer surgeries, to be able to detect the type of tissue that you're resecting at the point of care. So without changing the workflow of surgery, we are able to take the byproduct of the surgery, so the smoke that is coming from the cautery device, analyze it with a mass spectrometer in real time, and then detect the composition of the molecules that the cautery device is generating and cutting into. That has a lot of potential for impact. It enables digital pathology right there on the operating bed and the operating theater. It has potential to inform and to enable resections and changes to the surgical plans. And it has a lot of engineering, pathology, computational chemistry, and other aspects that make it really interesting to work on.
Very cool. Frank?
Thanks. Recently I was lucky enough to work on a project called the OR Black Box, which is a project that spun out of St. Michael's Hospital and then was carried by a company called Surgical Safety Technologies, where I was the director of AI on the team there. Essentially what we were trying to do is recreate what the black box does on airplanes, but do it in the operating room by recording as much as we possibly can, and identifying when things go wrong, trying to find the cause of why things went wrong, but also identifying good behavior and good outcomes, and also using the data we collect in the OR black box to track those as well. We collected basically everything you can think of. We had 4 cameras on the walls of the operating room. We had sensor data coming directly from all of the equipment in the room. We had cameras on the surgical equipment that went into the body, microphones, so we listened to conversations, making sure that the team's getting along well, and we also had raw access to the medical record. And then for all this data, we had a suite of about 12 or 11 different tasks or products that ranged from automatic monitoring of surgical safety checklists to make sure that the team is attending to all the important parts of generic surgeries. Most of our focus was on computer vision, so looking at the inside of a patient, watching for adverse events like bleeding events or various kinds of other problems that can occur with technical skill, tracking the motions of the implements inside of the patient. And I mentioned, doing speech recognition and kind of sentiment analysis on the team to make sure that the team dynamics are such that the overall procedure was done effectively, safely, and minimizing adverse events. I think one of the reasons why I really love this project was that it really bridged the scientific world. So we were interested in publishing work and working with various big universities and hospitals to do studies and publish, but also it was deployment. So I was very passionate when I joined the group to not just publish papers, but also try to get things, like actually make a change in the world. I think in healthcare and AI, if I made it through a second, it's a technology that can provide such a social benefit. And I think I wanted to actually do something as opposed to just talking to a bunch of computer scientists about F1 and AUC curves and that kind of stuff. So I was very happy to get involved.
So we're doing quite a few cool projects at deploying AI at UHN, but I think I'll go 3 for 3 in terms of picking on surgery projects. And so we have a very cool project where we're looking at laparoscopic surgeries and identifying safe and unsafe cuts that happen during the surgery. Doing this using machine learning is tricky for a number of different reasons. First, because there are many biases in the images that we get, including how the camera is positioned. The training data has tools present which indicate what safe zones are, because that's where the surgeon likes to cut, and that impacts the distribution of the training data, and hence impacts performance of the test set. And also really deploying this in real time, because this is one area where having a suggestion come 10 minutes later is not really useful. You've already made the cut. So how to optimize things like network packet flows in order to make sure that we can do 30 frames a second at a quarter of a second at most delay relative to the actual position of the tools is a really cool computer science problem rather than just AI problem. So for all of those reasons, I think that's a cool thing to do.
Very cool. I have nothing to add to the surgical side, but I think I'll speak to coming to deployment from a different lens as a clinician is trying to figure out our work mainly is around deployment and evaluation. And so coming to it from the perspective of having not built the algorithm, having often no idea what data that algorithm was trained on, how do you make sure that normal humans who will end up using this algorithm, whether they're a clinician or an administrator deciding to purchase or implement this algorithm, actually have an idea of what they are purchasing, what they are deploying, and how can they feel that they are doing so kind of safely and at high quality. So the fun for us is, maybe not so fun for the developers of different AI models, is finding all of the ways in which they fail, right? And Google, there was a great paper about high stakes AI talking about data cascades and all the decisions you make from picking the problem through to selecting and annotating the data through to deployment and how that impacts safety and quality. And when we, for example, compared 4 different chest X-ray classifiers using the diversity of data that is represented in the population that we serve in the West End of Toronto, of different ages, different ethnicities, et cetera, you start to see that, as we would expect, but how do you communicate this to other people, that while overall performance may be okay, there may be a little bit of a generalization gap from what was advertised in the literature or by the vendor. But then you look at different subgroups and you see, sometimes 10 or 20 or 30 point differences in performance between young female patients and old male patients, as an example. And then when you look at compare the algorithm actually failed or the human failed, you start to see all these other patterns where, for example, a life-threatening condition that basically no radiologist would ever miss was missed by all 4 algorithms for the very simple reason that none of these algorithms were ever trained on this very uncommon condition, in this case a pneumomediastinum, because for all the reasons that I'm sure we'll get into, that disease exists in kind of the long tail of distribution of what a radiologist would normally see, and to train an algorithm on this very rare occurrence is somewhat challenging to do. So coming to it from how do we best prepare normal humans to accept AI in whatever form that takes, and how do we communicate risk to humans who will, at least for now, ultimately need to make decisions in clinical medicine. That's the stuff that kind of excites me.
All right.
Question?
Yeah.
Who are non-normal humans?
Well, mostly people in this room. I think we think we're all pretty normal, but if you look at the distribution of how care is delivered, there are very few people in the universe who understand what needs to happen clinically, understand how business decisions are made in healthcare, plus understand the machine learning side. So especially because we're very early days in trying to deploy AI in healthcare. It's like trying to explain the internet to your grandmother 20 years ago. There's a lot of work to be done to kind of build and earn that trust.
So I want to go off that analogy of explaining the internet to your grandmother 20 years ago and ask the panel, and this is open to everyone, when you talk to people who are outside this room, as you go in and say, hey, I have this really cool tool, we should deploy it, I'm curious to hear what the reactions you've had are, both for folks to be aware of what they are, but also how, if you did you get past those initial reactions? So, open question.
So, sometimes people come to us first, and they heard about machine learning in healthcare, and they want to get involved. So they go to like an institute like Vector or a school like U of T, and they find people who are working in this area, and then they try to get you involved, or there's maybe companies who are doing something in this space, and they're advertising themselves as being deep learning, in healthcare. So they want to bring you on, they want to get involved, but I think sometimes the reason why they want to get involved is because they think it's a new thing, they want to learn about it, they want to be seen as being cutting edge. There's all these kinds of reasons of that nature, like kind of somewhat superficial, apart from learning, superficial reasons to get involved. But then actually the deployment of it, they get a little bit skittish about. Like they don't care about, I think Mohammed Mamdani talked about it this morning. They don't care exactly what the accuracies are. Like they care about workflows and how it fits into the actual healthcare delivery system. So when you have a model that you're very excited about and you say, I want to deploy this and these are all the cool things we can do with it, their excitement is they don't really care about that. They want to see how it's actually deployed, and then how it's actually deployed is usually not the way that we initially developed it in the first place. So you have to work out, okay, we're no longer trying to minimize error or maximize accuracy or whatever. We're trying to save time, or we're trying to reduce visits, or have some other metric entirely, and then we have another set of problems we're dealing with that have nothing to do with like the model, but more how the model is used. So when I'm trying to convince people that this is something that's ready and to be deployed, we have to work with a lot of people, not just computer scientists, but like designers and like people to work on an interface that you access the model through. Clinicians to make sure we're solving reasonable tasks, and then having everybody kind of eventually point in the right direction at the same time. And then deploy something that kind of like shows clinicians that this is something that I can actually use, and it's not just a table of numbers with numbers going up.
I want to echo it. I think it needs to be a pull rather than a push. If you're going to a clinical group and say, here, use this AI, it's like you're not coming from the right perspective. You need to have the clinician come to you and say, we would love to have AI, and then you can go and work with them to understand what the AI really should be and whether it needs to be deep learning or simple regression. And I've had people comment that, oh, this tool is broke, the AI is broken, it doesn't accept special characters. So people's understanding of AI will vary. So I think it's important that we sort of be the subject matter experts to whom the users come, and we can help them build the right solution rather than us saying we have a solution for a problem that may not exist.
I think I'll echo and build on the hype machine has done a very good job. I don't know who runs it, but they're very good at, creating this demand for AI. Like every health system and leader, for some reason, wants to deploy AI, right? Great, but the problem is like, what's the next conversation after that, and how do you how do you explain it? So I'll say two things. One is, on the clinician side, I think, there is a gap there, and probably a simple way to try and address it is, as you just described, is like most clinicians understand what logistic regression is, at least in concept, and they've learned how to evaluate them. So if you can help them understand that this is just like a fancy version of logistic regression, and secretly logistic regression works just as well on tabular data most of the time, then they will, you can help with that kind of knowledge gap. On the administrative side, or the business decision-making side, I think it's a different conversation and a little bit harder, but ultimately, they don't actually care about AI. I mean, sometimes for reputational purposes, it's nice to say that you are doing AI, but that'll only get you so far. At the end of the day, they have real problems that need to be solved. They don't have enough of a health human resources to deliver care to their patients. They need to squeeze more time out of their existing MRI machine. They have challenging patients or challenging cases where quality is in question, etc. So, you can sell AI as part of the solution, so to speak, but at the end of the day, they have real problems that they need to solve, and the job of the community here is to package up the AI in such a way that it actually solves real problems, and not just fantasy ones, so to speak.
So I want to add a little bit to that. Going back to your question, you asked, how do people react when you talk about AI? So talking to the very young, they're very excited. You're cutting edge. The hype machine has worked. The they're very smart. They ask you, how much money am I going to make out of this? How fast will I make the money? So that's the first reaction I get out of the young ones. There were a lot of comments on the clinical uptake and how you sell to clinicians and so forth. But then there's another side of things that enables our work, and that is getting funding. So from the venture capitalists for what we are building, or from the funding agencies if we are still fundamental. From the venture capitalists and large companies, if you want to sell your AI work, the answer I often get is, how much in dollars? Tell me exactly how am I going to build this, under which product, under what code, and how much money I'm going to get per patient. Out of the scientific community and our funding agencies, it's almost the opposite conversation I find, in that when trying to make your AI human understandable, that the human element of AI and how it impacts and how it's deployed becomes secondary almost in nature. I find that I am almost hiding the practical aspects that I have to spend so much time on and trying to put in a lot of fancy things that are unnecessary, that if I gave it to Frank's company, he may decide I don't need any of these things. I'm just going to simplify it and deploy it. So those are two other groups of people that with slightly different reactions to AI.
Very cool. I think that presents a pretty diverse view on how people think about deployment. But I want to pick on some themes that were brought about in the previous responses, which is about the idea of, ownership and funding and who pays for it. So let me ask this as the next question. Let's say you have a company or you're building out a research project that you think is mature for deployment. Who's paying for it? Like, let's say your grad student runs the research project, writes the few NeurIPS papers that they need in order to graduate, and then they're out. You have this piece of technology. Who maintains it long term? So I'm curious to hear about it from your perspectives, and you represent a pretty wide swath across industry, clinics, as well as academia. And what have you found as successful models for maintenance of machine learning models that have been deployed, either by yourselves or others?
I mean, the two categories that I've seen, I suppose, for discussion is, is the build versus buy, basically. And if you're a health entity of some kind, you basically have that decision to make, is am I going to be able to develop the skill set and the team and maintain it in-house to be able to build, evaluate, deploy, monitor, and maintain algorithms working custom in my environment on my patients, solving the problems that I care about? Or do I need to go out and buy this service from a commercial entity who will take care of all the stuff that I don't know how to do and don't want to do? And I think one of the challenges is that with these two options is, on the one side, building and maintaining your own team in this market, right, where the top talent want to work everywhere, they're very expensive, et cetera, it is becoming more democratized, but it's very hard to do. And often trying to build a safe space for data scientists, there may be a few places where that can be done, but otherwise, if they get exposed to like bureaucracy, they tend to potentially die very quickly, right? And you also need the scale, right? You can't have a community hospital with 140 beds and 3-person IT team building and maintaining their own machine learning models. They can barely maintain their health information systems. On the buy side, it would be nice if you could go out and pick off the shelf exactly the machine learning model that works for you. The problem is that doesn't exist today necessarily, for other reasons we could explore, but like cost of development, regulatory, et cetera. There's a lot of kind of widgets out there, but it may not fit your kind of snowflakey problem. So I don't know that it's a question that's been answered, but I think it will be interesting to see over time which model plays out better in healthcare. Because in other industries, you've seen both play out, like the big companies who collect a lot of data, build their own in-house, machine learning teams and will generate ROI from that. And then the smaller ones who don't have that have to buy some software that does a bunch of stuff, although they'll still need some talent in-house. So, you know, and it'll be interesting in Canada because there are no huge entities, right, who deliver healthcare. We've decided largely that, you know, hospitals or maybe a region governs deployment, but when you have even hundreds of thousands or small millions of patients, that's not even sometimes enough to see the diversity of data you need to, you know, it's not millions or hundreds of millions like some systems, for example, in the US.
Maybe the point I want to jump off of that you said is who pays for it? And, you know, in the current model, if you're a company or if you're, you know, or if you have a local team, it really is the hospital that pays for it, and the hospital gets money from the government in order to maintain its operations. But the savings from deploying some of these AI are actually going to be more visible to the central pockets than they are going to be visible to the independent hospital. So really, a hospital may be in a situation where they pay to deploy some AI, end up seeing fewer patients, end up getting less money from the government, while the government has actually saved money through the delivery of better healthcare. And this creates a very interesting conundrum in terms of the deployment of resources.
That's a really interesting perspective on thinking about costs in deployment. So I want to pivot a little bit, because thus far in our conversation, we've talked about how people might interact with ML systems. You know, who do you have to convince, who pays for it? I want to flip that equation and ask, how do ML systems interact with people, and how do they change the way clinicians and people behave? Is that something that we as practitioners need to be concerned about? How do we think about the design questions around human factors and the mechanistic processes within healthcare systems when we design predictive systems that are intended to be deployed within those contexts?
It's a super interesting and challenging question because, you know, I think there needs to be more thought on the human factor side of machine learning deployment. You know, in the good old days, you know, industrial engineers, I suppose, would study human-machine interactions. And, you know, when they were designing things like cockpits and airplanes, they would pay very close attention to human attention, right? Because, you know, what has been shown to happen, and we know happens, is once a human becomes reliant and starts to trust a system, right? Whether that's lung nodule detection, stroke detection, even your Waze, you've all kind of seen it. They basically, you know, tune out, have outsourced that thinking to that algorithm and begin to trust it, and lose their concentration on that particular task. And it's a real question that I don't pretend to know the answer to. You know, how do you design these tools to achieve some kind of balance where, you know, the machine learning algorithm can do its thing that it can do with high reliability and, you know, with very low risk of error or safety risk, and have the human play some role that is complementary in that. Now, I'll give you an example. There's a company doing something totally awesome that I think is called Heart Vista. They've figured out how to do a very complicated task almost automatically, and that is the cardiac MRI examination. Okay, that's like, you know, to become an MRI technologist is one thing, then to be able to figure out all the planes of the heart, especially if they have, you know, some abnormality, and do that in a short period of time is very difficult. And this system actually plugs into the MRI machine, can read all the images and prescribe the next plane and do it quickly and optimize sequences, etc. You know, take an exam from an hour to 30 or 20 minutes. And, you know, scale a workforce, in this case a cardiac MRI technologist, outside of, you know, super subspecialized centers. So that's great, except for, you know, what happens when we take that skill that is hard enough to build and maintain away from these cardiac MRI technologists. Like if we have 500 people in the world who can do that skill today, how many are we going to have in, 20 years once this is fully deployed, are we going to have more because now more people need support, or are we going to have fewer? I think these are all unanswered questions, so to speak, that definitely warrant more discussion and consideration around the human factors.
So just picking up something that Ben mentioned in terms of there needs to be more studies of the human factor. We were talking at our table that the FDA has updated its guidelines for AI technologies and software to include a human aspect as well. And interestingly, 2 recent papers came out, one on pathology and another one on cardiology, cardiac imaging, that was studying the performance of human operators in performing a task either in pathology or in cardiac imaging, interpreting cardiac images with AI models. And turned out that AI models were very close in terms of their performance to the better performing human operators, and there was a lot more variability in the performance of AI, of the human operators. The question that wasn't answered was it because there were some experiments there that AI actually provided some feedback to the humans and others that they didn't. So it wasn't very clear whether the AI and the humans converged so well because the humans relied so much on AI, or was it because independently they were so good. So there's a lot of room for discussion and kind of considering that. The other thing is, as you mentioned and also Ben talked about it, interestingly in interventions you see this quite a bit, that the humans all of a sudden become too reliant on the technology. It's very simple. This is not AI. A very simple technology they use in surgery is navigation. So telling the surgeon where they are, of course they know where they are at any given point, but with respect to a coordinate system. So if you had a coordinate system, your coordinate system of the patient, the bed, you would tell them where they are, and it's important because they take images, preoperative images or sometimes intraoperative images, and you want to be able to connect all of these. The surgeons become so reliant. If you have, based on your, let's say, your tracking device, you have kind of a boundary for them, and you tell them through a beep if they're outside of that boundary for whatever problem you're defining, they become so reliant that all of a sudden, all they are looking for is on their screen for where they are instead of looking at the patient, or they listen for this. So these are some of the byproducts that you observe in surgeries when you go in, but it's interesting that if you do not think about all of these prior to this, then your data is all of a sudden now very biased because the human became too reliant on the device.
And I think that's why it's so important to design it well from the beginning with all this in mind, because once that cascade starts, it's very hard to undo, And you don't know if the introduction of the AI is actually net better, because that study hasn't been done, or net worse. But you do know that it's going to change how, humans interact with it, because that happens all the time.
And these are not AI-specific problems.
Yeah.
There's problems with any technology you introduce absolutely into any environment. So health technology assessment is a field that's been around for a while, and this is something that's very important to think about when you're, whether you're deploying a new type of imaging modality, or if you're deploying a black box AI model or a non-black box AI model, you need to think through those components.
And it's funny because even in imaging, radiologists like to joke, I guess, that 20 years ago, in the clinicians knew how to perform like a real physical exam, right? They knew how to determine information from a patient by asking them questions, putting their hands, percussing, various other things. And now, in the emergency department, after the introduction of CT, MRI, ultrasound, they just go to the imaging department. Right? And so the question is, is that better or not? That's a question to be asked. Certainly on the plus side, you're more likely to get the right diagnosis. One of my radiology colleagues, talks about, he was a family doc before he was a radiologist. He's like, that whole family medicine thing is ridiculous. Like, you used to go around like tapping on people and then like listening them to their chests with cups and stuff, and you think that's better than these machines that give you the answer, like put everyone in them. And the other side is like, well, those machines are expensive, they produce radiation, they take a long period of time. So to your point, like, we don't know if some of these things are better or not, but certainly, these are decisions that we make about designing these tools will influence how really healthcare is practiced and the outcomes in the future.
So to add very quickly, like there's a whole like sub area of computer science called human-computer interaction with its own kind of scientific processes. It's very intricate, involved, historical area of computer science, and it's unfortunate that a lot of people who focus on machine learning don't get exposed too much to the science of human-computer interaction. But that's changing quite a bit. There's a really great person I want to give a shout out to at U of T called Professor Fanny Chevalier, who's a HCI, human-computer interaction professor, but she does a lot of work in healthcare. And so more people like her is going to help make sure that the models are used in appropriate ways and aren't suffering from some of the problems we heard about. But also I think students who are interested in modeling should also be exposed a little bit to those kinds of courses if they're doing a certificate program, for example.
Thank you. So I want to probe a bit deeper into thinking about something that you said, Mike, which is about we should treat ML like any other technology that's introduced into the workflow. So I'm going to push back on that and say ML is indeed a different kind of technology that you introduce, but it has a very specific limitation, which is that the guarantees from a statistical perspective that you get for this ML model exist as long as you're deploying it on data that looks like the training set. And in healthcare, data changes over time. This is in contrast to say something like a MRI machine, where we have the knowledge of the underlying physics guiding us in terms of thinking about how the images from the MRI machine are interpreted. So I want to just push back on that and say that how do we even think about like regulating machine learning models when they have this dependency on the kind of input data that's being fed into them? And this is not specific to Mike, it's sort of an open question. Yeah.
I'll take the first stab at it, which is to say all healthcare technology is only validated on a specific subset of a population. So, yes, the physics of an MRI machine or an X-ray machine are the same regardless of what patient you put under the X-ray machine, but the interpretation that you will get from a radiologist will depend heavily on the radiologist experience or radiologist knowledge of certain ethnic groups where there could be variability, or for sure I know that this is the case in genetics where facial features are something that's very much depends on the knowledge of the geneticist of the ethnic groups that they're looking at. And then a geneticist who has no experience with a specific ethnic group will be able to make zero interpretation. So I think all of our healthcare technology to some extent is validated on a specific set, and then the actual deployment in other settings becomes a data set shift. And you have to think about it when you're deploying it. The same way you have to think about, you deploy something in a community setting, then you move it, or an academic center, you move it into a community setting, and all your false positive, false negative rates could be completely out of whack. And again, I don't think it has that much to do with AI specifically. I think the place where AI does get very interesting is when you have active learning or reinforcement learning that's taking place and is actually changing the model over time. Their AI will be very different than the other technology, but I know very few places that actually are deploying that now.
As you're describing, it sounds, people won't like it because regulation for software as a medical device is kind of hard enough to begin with, but it's much closer to a new therapeutic in the sense of how much you know about it before deploying it than a medical device that may be more deterministic about if this, then this, in the sense that a lot of our chemotherapy drugs, for example, were allowed onto the market because of a trial that usually has a well-curated population with a good chance of, the drug showing a positive result from that trial, which may or may not be diverse or reflective of the population into which that drug is being deployed, so to speak. So, and that's a much more involved process, which you do see the FDA, for example, kind of going towards, in the sense of, I would say they're not looking at big enough trials yet, but they are using some of the thinking around like good manufacturing processes for drug development or for drug manufacturing, where they're starting to suggest that as an approach to, machine learning model development? And can we, to your other point, can we kind of validate the process that a company uses to develop a machine learning algorithm rather than having to test every version? But it sounds a lot more like a drug, which is more probabilistic in the sense that it works for some people but not for others. And we know in one population how well it performs, so we then try and generalize it or apply it to our patient in front of us, which is a lot closer to, I think, what machine learning is doing today.
But I want to add that, after the drug has already been introduced to the market, there's a significant amount of work that goes into monitoring the drug after it's been introduced in the market. So monitoring it for indications, and there's also an academic, research endeavor that thinks about drug repurposing based on all of this data that's collected on drugs and their post hoc indications after it's been approved. And perhaps in the same way that there should be some mechanism to think about monitoring of ML models in terms of population level effects that it's having in changing population level healthcare outcomes. So, yeah, Frank.
Yeah, there is, so like our own regulation generally, I mean, there's a lot of good progress these days. The International Standards Organization has a subcommittee on AI, and they're starting to push out standards, mostly on foundational. So there's working group 1 is foundational definitions of AI, and working group 3, I think, is like safety and security of AI models. So you have like a foundation of standards that governments tend to use in their legislation. Meanwhile, like I think both the FDA and Health Canada seem to understand that the performance of machine learning, positive and negative, is very closely linked to the data you use. So the approvals from the FDA tend to have a lot of caveats about the well-adjudicated data sets that was used to train the original model. I don't remember seeing anything about monitoring in the FDA, but the task force, the Health Canada task force on AI and medical devices, if I recall correctly, and I'm only 90% sure this is correct, but I'll say it anyway, they're looking at monitoring like change over time, and they're aware of like distributional shift and that sort of thing. So in the case of models changing over time, they're aware of where the problems come from, which is great.
Go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah. I want to also add that we are discussing AI as one solution, but really the answer to this question is also going to depend on what the outcome is. What is the end point? What is the metric that we are measuring? And unlike perhaps a new therapeutic where the outcome is going to be patients, responding, not responding, or the degree they respond, some of the AI models, many of them at the beginning, or at least as we are going through deployment, aren't really going to be necessarily a black and white indication and outcome for patients. They're going to be more maybe population level screening or highlighting special cases for more attention, or beeping more, even more than the clinicians want. So it would be those kinds of end goals that we are measuring for now, until we have AI models that we really replace physicians with and so forth. So I suppose that the answer to that question really depends on what is the end goal and what is the metric that we are measuring in terms of AI's impact. And that's going to be really the key, I'm assuming, in FDA's approval of a tool, and how long they want to, or how short of an approval they want to give, and then how many times do they want the software, at what level to be reapproved once it's changed.
Wonderful. I think we're now at about the time where all of you have hopefully collected a sufficient set of controversial questions to ask the set of panelists. So I'm going to open it up to the audience, really. Please raise your hand, and I'm happy to call on you to ask any questions that you might have of the group.
This gets very controversial.
Oh, you might need a mic? Oh, hang on.
Oh, but there's people online.
There are people on the internet.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll try not to say anything too controversial. You're all doing great work at great institutions, but we're a publicly funded healthcare system. Yet it seems that whenever, I work at THP, if I want something that St. Mike's has done to come to THP, we have to pay for it. But we as taxpayers, as citizens, we pay for it in our data, we pay for it for the taxes that pays for the salary of the developers. There's an argument to be said that packaging it and tech support is a service that we can pay for, but how come it always has to be through independent for-profit corporations? What are some possible alternatives, if you think there are any?
I guess as somebody who has built built software that was deployed as a then spun out into a commercial entity, we had hospitals that absolutely refused to take our software for free because they want support. They want to know that when it stops working, there's a number to call. They want to know that when there is a policy breach, their privacy breach, there is an insurance company that's going to back their liability. So all of these things are not something that a hospital or a public entity is supported to do. So until we have a completely public system and it's like all one entity, I don't think we're going to go away from the commercial companies bringing software that's, or AI or whatever, that's developed in one hospital to another hospital, even when they are just across the street from each other.
Yes.
But there is an alternative universe, probably, and if you are we alluded to it before, somebody decided that every health institution in Ontario, since that's where we're all sitting, should be standalone entities, right? So, the alternative universe is that they were actually somehow, one larger entity, that all of the paperwork and stuff that you were describing was just transferring from one department to another. And if you look at the scale required to do a lot of AI stuff, although it would be very messy to do what I just described, from a pure data perspective and pure technology perspective, it would certainly make more sense. And I think this is why you see again, more in the US than here, the larger systems with more data and more scale, some of them are like hundreds of hospitals, can buy one piece of software and deploy it across 100 different places, and kind of reap the benefits that come to those that have that scale, which is something of a unique property, I think, to a lot of these AI tools, especially if you're building them in-house, which is, I guess, something that only kind of the big systems can do.
All right, I know we have a question at the back over there.
Is interpretability essential for deployment?
There's some controversy on this. So there's a lot of people in the machine learning community who are kind of against explainability and interpretability, and they bring up a lot of good reasons. Like the methods you use to do explainable AI themselves are kind of AI, they're built off of AI, or they're highly statistical. They also make mistakes, especially like certain kinds of methods make mistakes more often than others. So they say, well, the explanations you're getting themselves are biased or problematic or errorful. They're not actually explaining anything, so there's lots of reasons to be skeptical. But I think that, like, realistically, you have to keep that in mind. But at least in my experience, clinicians want to understand why things are happening, and if there's an error, they want to know why there's an error that's happening. They're not satisfied with just knowing this is the architecture, this is the loss function, this is the data we use. They want to look at every single case, an arbitrary case, and understand why the model did what it did. And to do that, you need some way of interpreting the decisions of the model. So I think like there's no silver bullet in the explainable AI space that is going to be applicable to all different kinds of tasks, and so far all of them suffer from some problem or another. But like we have to keep on moving in that direction because people are going to still want to understand like why did the AI make this boneheaded mistake when it's so obviously wrong.
I would argue that maybe interpretability. I agree with what Frank was saying. I would argue that communication with humans is going to be a requirement. It is a requirement for deployment. Whether that communication is the statistics of, I don't know, Bayesian network that you're deploying for interpretability or another ensemble method, it may not be any of those. In fact, it might be picking out the failure cases and showing those to the clinicians. I would say that interpretability in that context is a requirement for deployment.
So I'll say from the clinical perspective, I think there's a need for explainability, so to speak, but I don't think it's the type of explainability that machine researchers like to talk about. So, I'll use a drug analogy. I believe that most clinicians are used to understanding the risks or potential failures of a drug by reading the label. They understand in which patients it shouldn't be used, they understand in which ones it should be used, and what contraindications are relative, et cetera, so they know where it's safe to be used. The folks at Duke have done some good work in applying this to machine learning with this concept of a model fact card. Same idea, let's run models through a gamut of challenging cases, different ethnicities, et cetera, and let's just show people who are eventually users, clinical users, how well this performs in certain populations, certain subgroups, so that don't trust this model or don't deploy it on females under 40, as an example. Whereas the explainability in machine learning, people tend to focus on more like, how does the drug work, right? So, or why didn't it work in a specific situation? So it's like aspirin, if it didn't work in my friend, you would be able to explain to me why it didn't work in my friend. When most clinicians, frankly, they don't really care why, where in the pathway and what about this patient made aspirin not work. They just need to know up front, should I give aspirin to this patient or not? And that's probably more from a, having done the validation or the external validation beforehand to know where, when, why, and how this drug might fail. Because I don't think they need to know in real time necessarily why this drug may or may not work on a patient, because that sounds very complicated for the average clinician to be able to sort through each and every single time.
So maybe I would summarize it as saying, maybe it's not, explainability is not necessary, but trust is. And explainability is one way of achieving trust. So if most of the cars that you drive today have there's no direct connection between the brake pedal and the brakes. But you trust that when you hit the brake pedal, the brakes will work. And even though what really is happening, it's an electric signal, they might as well have connected the keyboard and the mouse, and you could have just pushed the mouse button on the button that said brake, for all practical purposes. But you trust that this will happen. If the machine learning model that we're talking about specifically has achieved that level of performance, then explainability may not be necessary. But explainability is a way of getting trust. It's a way of explaining, here is why I'm making this prediction, and then the physician can choose whether to trust the model in this case or not to trust it.
A good development tool, perhaps, not necessarily a requirement for deployment.
That's also an interesting analogy in the context of thinking of how to deploy models, which is to package them in ways that clinicians are familiar of interacting with, because that might increase their ability to trust the system from the get-go. Senator.
So switching gears, since we're talking a little bit about incentives as well, what, according to you, is the most lucrative path to commercialization? Is it provider wallets, payer wallets, patient wallets, or pharma wallets? And based on your answer, will that impact innovation for these different groups moving forward?
I don't have a really good answer for that. Everyone's looking at me, so I have to talk now. I think it depends on what you're trying to accomplish. Like a lot of the stuff I've been involved with, some of the companies have been more like at the institutional level, so there'd be like the hospital paying for it or a long-term care facility paying for something. And often what happens is it's something like a quality improvement program, or we're part of a clinical trial or something like that. But that's good to get things off the ground. I'm not sure if it's lucrative, but maybe partially so. It gets things off the ground, gives you some runway, and you can keep on developing things going forward. But like it's also the case that the hospitals and the long-term care facilities and other organizations that can pay for these relatively expensive programs that go over multiple years is not spread over the entire community. And I think that's also something that people who are in the private sector need to be aware of. Like we have to be aware of the equity issue. So it's not I can't remember what word you used, but the incentives can't just be financial. We have to see, and I think what Mohammed was talking about before also, there has to be some way of making sure that things are widely deployed. But also, like, some of the companies are more focused on like wearables and the quantified self, and it just doesn't make sense for a hospital necessarily to send out tons of smartwatches to a bunch of individual patients. Sometimes if it's a wellness thing, it's really on the individual to get it themselves. In that case, you're dipping into the patient's wallet, I guess. And there too, there's ethical concerns about who gets access to that kind of technology, which we have to keep in mind too. So again, like, there's financial incentives. There's lots of ways you can eke out a living deploying these things in practice, but also there's incentives to do social good.
Well, maybe it depends on a lot on the AI and the problem. So, in some cases, the pharmaceutical wallets, those are obviously the biggest wallets. But if some of the things that we're doing are not going to be very applicable in there. One thing I would point out is that when it comes to specifically the hospital and the clinical care side, I would point to American wallets as being much more lucrative than Canadian wallets. And the amount of healthcare spending per person south of the border is much higher, and the number of people is much higher. So it's really deploying inside Canada is not very lucrative for many companies. And actually, as then I look, at least in the experience that I've had across the pond to the UK, there it's also not that lucrative, but a lot easier, because there are larger, or NHS is one organization, there are trusts which incorporate many hospitals all together. While here, you sell one hospital at a time, and it's a long and painful process to sell to any individual hospital. So Canada in some ways is in the sort of the worst of both worlds kind of setting, where we have less money per hospital and then still have to work at the hospitals individually.
I'll say it's an interesting question that I don't know the answer to either, but it's interesting to think of, AI, whatever it is, since we're at an AI day and nobody's defined it, but the idea is, what is the value that can be created with each, decision, so to speak, and a new pharma drug per patient is worth like thousands of dollars, tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands. A specific diagnosis for treatment may be worth tens or hundreds of dollars sometimes. Some just like assistive aids, are like dollars or cents. So pharma's wallet's bigger. Then on the direct to patient side is an interesting one, because people aren't probably paying lots of money, but there's so many of them. So if you can bypass all these systems, which separate conversation, but I think general trend is towards more direct to consumer, direct to patient care provision, just because of all of the challenges that we've described, and as we watch our health system crumble slowly or quickly around us, as people build new systems to deliver care to direct to patients, I think that the size of that wallet, if that's the word we're using, is going to grow. So I'm more optimistic about the pharma and the direct to patient side than figuring out how we fit it into the workflow of all these health systems, despite that being my main area of passion. Maybe it's the devil I don't know. That's the problem.
Sounds good. Yeah. We have one last question from Elham.
Just a very quick question. Just a quick follow-up on the cost, and built on that has been already discussed. AI is expensive, so thanks to the hype machine. So human resources are expensive, infrastructure, computing is expensive. So I wonder, let's say with your limited budget, how would you balance between the two? Where should the money go first? Just to run your research, run your passion.
Between which two?
The computing infrastructure, GPUs, or human resources?
I would say human resources, but in a real world, you can't really choose one. My ideal world, it will all go to human resources, and I would find people that would donate GPU time to me, because we do such wonderful work that they would want to donate GPU time to me. I would say that human resources, GPUs change, costs change, needs change, I would say that human resources, if I had a limited pocket, most of my money I would put on human resources, and if I have brilliant people, they'll find a way to support themselves somehow. I don't know.
All right. Yeah. Finally, I just want to open it up to see if anyone has any parting thoughts or words of wisdom in the context of deployment. Any thoughts for folks out there with a new AI tool that they're thinking about deploying?
I'm the only one probably who doesn't have a company. Frank just asked me. But since I do intervention work, as I mentioned, my work includes deployment right from the start. I would say spend time, don't be quick to come up with a solution before you extensively study your problem. You hear multiple people's point of view. You continuously do this. So I'm an engineer by training, and we have the empathize, ideate, prototype, test, and then go through the loop, the engineering design loop. I can't emphasize the importance of that. It is extremely, extremely important to listen really well, develop well, and then go through that loop. At least that has been my experience and deployment of the technologies I have.
Wonderful. I think we are at time, so another round of applause for all the panelists for their time.